Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. On this episode of the show, Michael Cocanower, CEO of AdviserCyber, is with me to talk about, you guessed it, cybersecurity for your financial advisory business. Here's the thing, the SEC and other regulators are getting really serious about cybersecurity, and with good reason. As you'll hear Michael share, the threats are real and most RIAs are not equipped internally to harden their defenses against cyber attacks. Worse yet, even fewer firms have the ability to respond when an attack occurs. So that's where folks like Michael and his team come in. This is the stuff that will give your clients that extra sleep at night factor. So buckle up. It's going to be, I promise, a fun and informative conversation about cybersecurity. Okay. Before we get to the conversation with Michael, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a guest or topic for the show, hit me up. I'm basically at Mike Langford anywhere on the internet, or you can shoot us an email, podcast@finservmarketing.com. Okay, let's get to the conversation with Michael Cocanower. Well, Michael Cocanower, so wonderful to see you. Welcome to the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
It's awesome. It's awesome. And by the way, for the viewers out there, I know a lot of people listen to this podcast and are not watching. For the viewers, you have to take a look at the background of Michael's setup here because he's got, I believe it's a Kurt Warner
jersey
behind you because you are a diehard Cardinals fan.
Yes.
And then he's got like Metal Palooza up on behind him there as well. What are these medals for? What are you competing at?
Yeah, well, okay. Competing is being generous. Participating is more like it. But the overwhelming majority of those are half marathons.
Okay.
And the reason for that is for me, I can decide Friday, like, you know what, I'm going to do a half marathon tomorrow. Whereas a full marathon, it's like, I better train a little bit for that, get a little bit prepared for that.
I love it. Well, people who are watching will notice I have no medals behind me. So you're doing...
Which I'm not sure what that means in terms of which of the two of us is the smartest.
Or just the fittest, right? Like I fitness for me is I love fitness. I try to stay in shape. I lift weights. I do cardio workout, but I am also the type of person who's like, hey, I want to do enough so I look good with my shirt off. That's about it. Right?
There you go. You've covered the important things in life.
And by the way, for those of you who are hoping to see me without my shirt off, that will not be happening in this episode. It's not that kind of show. Anyway, let's get into it, man. I'm so thrilled that you and the team reached out to talk about what you're doing with AdviserCyber and how it's going to help financial advisors and wealth management firms. So I thought we'd dive into things and kick things off a little bit with setting the stage with an exploration of some of the new SEC rules that have changed related to cybersecurity for RIAs. How would you go about summarizing those changes so we kind of have a table set for everybody?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is really that answer falls into two categories. We've got some regulations out there related to cybersecurity that are still in a proposed state. So they were actually proposed a couple of years ago, have been through a couple rounds of comment periods, but have not yet been finalized by the SEC. And then we've got some others that have been finalized and are kind of locked in, so to speak, and are now in effect. And what I mean by in effect is anytime the SEC puts out a new rule, there's always a time period that they give regulated firms to comply with the new rules. So we're going to be entering that window where now it's like, okay, the clock is now ticking and you have X amount of time to start it. So really, there's a couple of different things. The first one, the one that's been approved, is recently the SEC made some pretty significant revisions to Reg SP, which is a regulation that was originally issued back in 2000. Needless to say, the technology and the cybersecurity world were very different places back in 2000 than they are today. And so certainly an update was appropriate, and the SEC recognized that and made that update. And SEC, the P in SP stands for privacy. So really that regulation is around protecting the privacy of personally identifiable information, confidential information about a regulated firm's customers and clients. And, what are they doing to do that? But then in addition, one of the things that came out as part of these changes that they recently issued and have now been finalized is also some new disclosure requirements as well, which basically say if you do experience some type of a cybersecurity incident that involves your customer's private information being compromised, you have to let them know so that they can take
Mm,
defensive actions against that or decide what they want to do in response to that. And that is what I would say is probably the most significant part of these new changes is the disclosure requirement. Because when I talk with advisors, to them, the regulations and what they have to do to meet the bar and that type of thing, they're not as worried about. But when you talk with the principals of these firms, the thing that keeps them up at night is them saying, you know what, if I have to send a notice to my customers that I've been hacked and their information has been hacked as a result, that's like on the order of business ending event for me. Like I'm
yeah.
super, super scared about that.
I can imagine how terrifying that is because, I don't know about anyone in the audience or you, Michael, but, I think I get at least once a month, maybe more, an email from a vendor that I have used that says, we have had a data breach of some sort. And we just need to let you know that your information should be out there. So be on the lookout just in case. And just so you know, we've taken appropriate security measures to fix it. Rarely do they say, guess what was stolen, Mike? Here's the information that went out there. But it's usually disconcerting. Now, most often when it's that type of information, it's something like a business that I shopped at. Right. So I'm
Yep.
less concerned. Like, it's not where
Yep.
my wealth is. Like, I can't remember the last time, you know, my Fidelity Investments or Bank of America sent me something that said, guess what, Mike? There's been a hack and we're not going to tell you if it affected you or not. Right.
Right, right. And certainly to your point, if I just pull the name out of the air of some large breaches from times past, like when I get a notice from Home Depot, like,
Yeah.
hey, it's like, okay, whatever, like, maybe they have my credit card number, maybe they have my name. But if I get the same letter from ABC Investment Advisors, who's my investment advisor, I'm going to go, whoa. I mean, I'm going to
Yeah.
sit up and take notice.
For sure. For sure. And to your point, the frightening component of it for the advisory firm is nobody wants to have even a smudge on their record. They don't want a black mark for sure. And advisors for the longest time have been, concerned with regulatory slaps on the wrist, if you will, or like, hey, listen, you guys did something silly with your marketing, or you didn't take good care of whatever. We're going to have to give you a little bit of a demerit, and this is going to be reported on your ADV. And there's kind of a little bit of like, it's frightening, but for the most part, most clients don't go to advisor check and go looking for things that happen on the ADV. But this type of stuff is a lot more concerning because you are required to report it to the client, right?
Yeah. So a couple of things I'd say, like I agree with you. I would say the overwhelming majority of customers are probably not looking up the ADV, but a lot of this information now has to be included in
Mm,
disclosures you make to customers, both when you originally sign them up as a customer, as well as annual updates and that type of thing, or when there is a breach that potentially. And when we look at the rules and some of the proposed regulations, you potentially have to issue updated versions of your disclosures when there is a breach that has happened to disclose that breach. And so, to your point, like I can't think of any business that is more trust based than the financial advisory business.
yeah.
And so, so much more critical. Like I'm sure Home Depot was worried, but like I don't really shop at Home Depot because I trust them. I shop because they have the screw in the weird size that I need, and that type of thing. But I am really going to pay much closer attention before I say, okay, I'm going to shift the treasure chest over to you, Mr. or Mrs. Advisor.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And that's a great distinction to make. The trust value, and then also um, the potential consequences are much greater when it's if Home Depot has a breach and some of my information got stolen and somebody uses it to buy something, okay, fine, it's fraud. If somebody hacks my advisor, it can wreck my life, right? Just with all my money being gone, or it could be a identity theft type of deal or something like that. So it could be really, really problematic.
Yeah, and I think you've got to not only think about what impact is that going to have on your existing customers when they learn that this disclosures happen and they start to rethink like, wow, where is my money and what are they doing, and
Yeah.
do I need to be kept up at night? But The other thing that you've got to think about is what are you never going to know about? Because once that disclosure's out there, if I'm going out and researching to find a new investment advisor and I find this disclosure on Mike Langford's firm that, gee, they had this cyber breach, like you're just never even going to get the call. So you don't even know that you've lost that
True.
opportunity to do business with me. And so there's the what's going to happen with the customers I already have, but then there's the what impact will this have on the customers I don't have yet that I'm never even going to have the opportunity to have a conversation with because of this.
Hugely valid point. It is because it's one of the things that I've said many times over the years is rarely do people come to a financial advisor's website. I mean, there's some, but the number one time they're going to come to your website is for validation. So they've met you at a cocktail party or whatever, or some other marketing event has brought them to consider you for their wealth management firm. They're going to go to your website and check you out just to make sure everything is on the up and up, that you are who you say you are. What else can I learn about the firm? They want to feel comfortable because they're about to bring their life savings to you to manage, right? And you're going to be part of their family's future going forward. So they might do a little bit of research, right? At that point in time. And to your
Absolutely.
point, you may never know that it costs you the business. So that is kind of scary. And the other thing that I might imagine for our audience, because our audience is 85% financial advisors, many of whom are in the RIA environment. RIAs particularly should be somewhat nervous about this because they are independent. They are smaller firms and they are competing with large firms. If large firm, and just take your pick of large firm, Morgan Stanley, Fidelity Investments, you name it, had some sort of data breach, I would still feel okay with that company because of the firepower of this monster institution and their technology. I mean, these companies spend $1 billion a year probably on their technology infrastructure. So if I'm a small firm, which has, maybe I have a couple of $1 billion AUM, but my team's still relatively small, I'm concerned about how that could impact me. And of course, clients might be concerned as well. How are you going to handle it? So that brings us to you and AdviserCyber. So AdviserCyber is a relatively new venture for you, and you've been in this business for a while. So it's not like you just woke up one day and decided, hey, I'm going to be in the tech space or the security
Right.
space. Let's dive into it. Why did you decide to launch AdviserCyber? What was behind it? Because you had a going business. Why this one now?
Yeah, great question. And still have an ongoing business. So I
Yeah.
started a managed services company, so kind of a traditional IT company about 27 years ago now. That business still runs today, successful business, growing, all that kind of stuff. So, but that's just a kind of a general IT business.
Mhm.
And that business did have some level of focus on financial advisors, but also focused on lots of other. I mean, the focus was more generic, small and mid-sized businesses, of which financial advisors fit that mold. But a couple of years ago, I started looking at a couple of things. Number one is the SEC's increasing focus on cybersecurity generally. And certainly that is exhibited by the fact that they propose these regulations that I talked about earlier a couple of years ago and been through a couple comment periods, all that sort of thing. But also the fact that, most people in this space know that every year the SEC puts out a list of examination priorities and they say,
Mm.
okay, for the next year, when we're examining RIAs, these are the issues that we're focused on. This is what has our attention right now. And since the inception of them putting out that memo, which has been roughly 10 years now, they put it out every year for about 10 years now, cybersecurity has been on the list,
Yeah.
unwavering, like every single year that it's been there. And so, they're exhibiting this increased focus, like they are from, the SEC it's funny. You always listen to the SEC speakers and they're like, these views are my own, don't necessarily represent the views of the commission, yada,
Yeah.
yada, yada. So they have to be very careful about what they say kind of explicitly. But I think if you look at everything that they're doing in terms of what they're pursuing for regulatory agenda, what they're putting out in the world in terms of risk alerts, in terms of examination priorities, like I feel like they are jumping up and down and screaming, we are concerned about cybersecurity and we see this as a real risk to the investing community and we intend to address that. And so I saw that trend a couple of years ago. And the straw that broke the camel's back for me was this proposed cybersecurity regulation, which we're still waiting for finalization on. And I said, wow, this is an opportunity to really focus specifically on registered investment advisors,
Mhm.
focus specifically on what they're required by the regulatory agency to do, and provide them with a plug and play service that delivers that. Because as a chief compliance officer, cybersecurity and even technology generally is largely a black box. They're like, I don't understand it. I don't know what happens inside of there, et cetera. And so with these new regulations coming out, they're either faced with the choice of, I've got to open up that black box and try to figure out what's going on inside, which,
Mm.
quite frankly, with everything else the SEC has been doing from a regulatory standpoint the last couple of years, they're busy people to begin with. They don't really have the time to figure that out. And so the alternative is for a service like AdviserCyber to come along and go, you know what, at least this slice of the pie, I'm just going to take off your plate. I'm going to handle that for you. I'm going to check all the boxes as they relate to cybersecurity. And I'm not just going to meet the regulatory requirements, but I am truly going to provide risk mitigation of being the victim of a cybersecurity attack. So there's a little analogy that I use to describe this, if you'll permit me. So
Oh, yeah.
a number of years ago, I had the very unfortunate experience of being a witness to a mass shooting event. There was a law firm on the third floor of our building. There was some type of dispute in there between the parties. One of the parties stormed out, went down to his vehicle, picked up a bunch of firearms, and went back to shoot everybody involved. Ended up right outside the window of the office where I sit as I do this podcast was where the shooting occurred. And
My
one
goodness.
person unfortunately lost their life. There were a couple of other people that were injured. I mean, horrific, horrific incident. And I was in the office that day, and I'm the guy in charge, which is a very scary position to be in. So I yelled at everybody to get on the ground. And then after the shooting happened, there's just eerie silence, and nobody's moving, and nothing's happening, and there's no sound. And I mean, I had employees under their desks crying. I mean, horrific time. And what seemed like an eternity was probably only about 5 minutes. One single uniformed police officer comes walking around the corner. And I'll never forget my reaction at that moment is I looked at him and I just kind of said, "Really? That's it? Like,
Mm.
where's the cavalry?
Yeah.
Where is the, and to be clear, I am very thankful for police officers. When my house gets robbed or I'm being attacked or
Yeah.
there's a fire, like I'm so thankful that I can call 911 and these guys will, or guys and gals will roll up regardless of the circumstances, run into the face of danger and save the day. And so I'm very, very thankful that they exist. But in that moment, I needed a little bit more than just a single uniformed police officer walking around with the handgun strapped to his belt. And so finally, a couple minutes after that, a dude comes walking around the corner with the full SWAT tactical gear, the ballistic shield, the machine gun, the helmet, the goggles, the knee pad, like the whole deal. And I just looked at him, I'm like, yeah, more of those dudes.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see right at this moment. And so that's how I kind of describe the difference between the IT resource that a registered investment advisor is working with today that solves the day-to-day problems, keeps the lights on, installs the patches, solves your printing problems, all that. That's the uniformed police officer.
Right.
What we are at AdviserCyber is we're those tactical guys with the ballistic shields and the helmets and the machine guns and all that kind of stuff. We are highly trained specialists that only focus on preventing cyber attacks and mitigating cyber attacks. And we're not going to deal with all the rest of that stuff. So you still need the police officers, but that's really what AdviserCyber was formed to do, is to put together a SWAT team, so to
Yeah.
speak, to focus exclusively on protecting investment advisors.
I tell you, as a somber of an, I guess,
Yeah.
experience that is, but the analogy is incredibly, well used, right? In that it paints a great picture, right? Of, hey, most firms are unmatched when it comes to the bad guys. The bad
100%.
guys are well more armed than you. It's kind of you think about the bad guy showing up who has all the armament and has been preparing for this day. And if you aren't prepared, and you even if you think you're prepared because you've read a few things, you're just not, right. Having
Right.
somebody who is a specialist, who is an expert, who is a marksman, if you will, in these areas is really, really important. And that leads me to a really, I think, meaningful part of this conversation, which is to kind of get a better understanding of what you actually do and how it differs from some other firms. So, for instance, I recently just had a conversation with Nicholas Rambis, who's the founder of Hush, and
Hmm.
fascinating conversation. His firm, they refer to themselves as the eraser for the internet, right? So they are way more. They will talk to you about cyber threats to your business and to your clients. They will also talk to you about, how do you make sure you can do things like reputation management? Like, what are you putting out on the web? Like, what could we find about you? And how do we make sure we control what information is out there about you? And they deal primarily with high net worth clients, ultra high net worth clients, and businesses, right? So, what's out there about your business, what we want to make sure that is not out there, and understanding some threat vectors. But when I think of Advisor Cyber, I don't think you're that type of firm. I think I mean, you might talk about those things. You might talk about threat vectors and how to protect against them. But I think it's important for financial advisors to really understand like what it is that you do, right? Like what type of things will you come in and do for them that helps protect them, that makes you that SWAT team.
Yeah, and I would actually argue we're complementary in a lot of respects with a service like you described, like Hush. So here's what I would say. A couple of things. One of the expressions that I have is that makes our job so challenging is the bad guys can try 1,000 different things and
Yeah.
they only have to be right once. I have to be right all 1,000 times. And at the end of the day, the math is just against me. There's a
Mm.
quote that I always use, which was from John Chambers, who's the CEO of Cisco. And he said, there are two types of companies in this world, those that have been hacked and those that don't yet know that they've been hacked. Right. And the point there is if your focus is exclusively on prevention, it's a valiant effort. Good luck to you. And that's not something that can be ignored. So certainly we certainly spend a significant amount of time thinking about prevention, but you've got to assume that they're going to get in. And so you've got to invest equally, not just in prevention, but in detection so that you know when they've got in mitigation so that you can prevent the amount of damage they're going to be able to do while they're in there, and in remediation. I got to get them kicked out as quickly as I possibly can. Right. And so I think, when we look at something like Hush, they're operating much earlier in the attack chain, right? Like they're
Mm.
trying to prevent you from even hitting the bad guy's radar screen to begin with, or from giving the bad guy enough information to be able to move to the next phase of their attack. Part of what we do is certainly the prevention piece, and it starts out in that area, but also is things like, firewalls, perimeter protection, that type of thing. But I would say an equal, if not greater part of our effort is in the detection, mitigation, and remediation space, which is I'm going to try to keep you from getting in, but I just know based on what I said earlier, the numbers are against me. And
Mm.
ultimately, someday, somehow, someone is going to be successful. And so I've got to plan for that contingency and make sure when the threat actor is successful that I know that they're there as fast as I possibly can, that I prevent them from being able to do any damage while they're there, and that I get them kicked back out and get the system back to a known stable state. And so that's what I would say the difference is we're operating much further along in the chain, whereas Hush is focused kind
Mm.
of way out at the start of the whole thing.
Right, right. So, and that's a great distinction. What are you seeing? And I ask Nicholas these same questions, but it's always great to get another vantage point. What are you seeing as the most common types of attacks or attempts of attack when it comes to wealth management firms?
Yeah, two things I would say there. The expression that I have is the easiest part of any system to hack is the human being.
Hmm.
And so if I'm a threat actor, I'm going after the people. I'm not going to sit there and try to pound on your firewall or, pound on your web gateway or whatever else. I'm going after the people because I know that those are the ones that I'm going to be able to compromise. And so when we talk about what are we seeing from an attack standpoint, it's all the humans, and really most of where that comes into play is, you know, e- email based compromise. So I'm going to
Mm.
get you to click on a link, download a file, open a Word document, a PDF, whatever, and I'm going to get you to take some type of action that's probably going to get you to, maybe download my bad guy tools, or maybe get you to give me your password so I can go to town, all sorts of things. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say is probably the most common vector that we're seeing, at least as a starting point. Now, once they get to that starting point, of course, there's a bunch of additional steps that they're going to do all kinds of additional damage and whatever else. But that's the most common starting point. And I would be remiss if, while we're having a discussion about email compromise, if I didn't at least touch on the importance of multi-factor authentication. So,
Mm.
people say, okay, what do I do to prevent that? Well, certainly training is a big part of it, right? And so if you don't have some type of a cybersecurity training program, which includes simulated phishing emails, et cetera, I think we're past the time where that's an optional thing. But more importantly, there was a study done by Microsoft. So one of the things that I do for fun is consume these threat reports.
Ooh.
So Verizon puts out a big threat report every year.
Yeah.
Microsoft put out a big one. CrowdStrike put out a big one. So I read through all these reports. And what was interesting is I read 4 reports recently: Microsoft, CrowdStrike, Verizon, and SonicWall. So all these massive players in the cybersecurity space. And what was interesting is there was a common theme across there's actually a handful of common themes across all the reports. Probably if you tied me up and said, okay, I need you to give me one takeaway from all 4 of these, like, what's the one
Yeah.
thing that they all said that was single most important thing? Far and away, multi-factor authentication and the importance of it. And in fact, the Microsoft report cited a statistic which said that 99.2% of all email-based attacks could have been prevented had multi-factor authentication been in place.
It absolutely makes sense. And for anyone who doubts it, it's like, how many times have you gotten an email or a text, if you have a multi-factor authentication, that says somebody has tried to log in as you?
Absolutely.
I get them all the time. Like, oh, somebody's trying to reset your password.
Yep.
Here's your whatever strong key, whatever it is.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, that's interesting, because that wasn't me. I was sleeping. Right. 2:00 in the morning or whatever, when somebody was trying to log into Netflix, Instagram, whatever the account is.
Yep.
That clearly wasn't Mike. So I love that you bring that up. And it's so darn easy. Every service you use now has at least 2-factor authentication
100%.
with either, the text-based or email-based authentication that sends you an email with the code, or many of them will allow you to use some sort of security token, right? Like a Google Authenticator or something like that many people may be familiar with. So they're super easy to use. Let's dial in a little bit more on the human element, because I think I'll call it fun. I'll call it fun to dig in on, because like we all like to tease people. Like, so I'll use an example. Like, at least once or so a month, somebody in my family will put on a thing: my Facebook account has been hacked. Don't accept it. It's like, no, it hasn't been hacked. Somebody's spoofing you.
You're right.
But part of what's going on Facebook is you click on stupid stuff. That's what's going on with stop clicking on dumb stuff. If it feels too good to be true, don't click on it. Have a little more discerning eye what you click on. Then it's really kind of funny. But some of these emails look a lot like they could be coming from a financial institution. They look like they could be coming from a friend. But if you weren't expecting that, like, one of the things that I tell people, and I do myself, is I go up in the email and I kind of do a little mouse over it to see, is like, and then 9 times out of 10, it's XYZ, Joe Schmo from gmail.com. It's not coming from, I'll use Bank of America or Fidelity or whatever it is. It's coming from, it's clearly not the right email. Like, this is not Fidelity or whoever.
Yeah, totally agree. And yeah, you're right. There's lots of stuff that you can look at to kind of recognize these attacks. It's interesting if you look at the evolution, right? Like, some of the earliest versions of these types of things were, you had a rich uncle that died in South Africa and left $30 million, and they're trying to get in touch with somebody to just accept this check, if they could just find anybody to accept this check, right? And it's now evolved to, you're right, there are some fairly sophisticated attacks out there where, you get an email from American Express, and if you're, or purports to be from American Express, and if you put it side by side with a real legitimate email you've got from American Express, like the logos match, the format matches, the fonts match, like it is a dead ringer.
Yeah.
But you're 100% right. Like, American Express is not going to send you an email from something at co.jp, right? So you can look at that. The other thing that's interesting too is, one of the things we teach people to do is, before you click on a link in an email, to hover over it and see where it goes. So if you hover over a link that goes to americanexpress.com, and again, you see it goes to something.co.uk, like, that's not American Express. That's not a legitimate link. The challenge with that, though, is you can't do that on a mobile device. And the overwhelming majority of people are now reading and triaging their emails on a phone, on a tablet, on whatever else. And it's much more difficult to determine those links. The other trend that we're seeing, and again, being in the industry that we're in, we're kind of right on the leading edge and the forefront of monitoring threat
Mm,
actor activity and what they're doing, is the ongoing arms race in generative AI. And so
yeah.
you've got people on my side of the house that are trying to use AI to analyze massive amounts of data and look for patterns in that data that match potentially malicious activity and then generate alerts based on that. But on the other side, you've got the bad guys that, like we've all seen in the old days and still sometimes currently that, one of the easy ways to recognize a fake email is poor English. Like, guess what, world? Microsoft knows how to speak proper English with proper grammar. So does Adobe. So if you're
Yeah.
getting, and so does American Express. So if you're getting emails from those people that, don't have proper grammar and proper English, probably a pretty good sign that it's not legitimate. However, ChatGPT also speaks proper English with proper grammar. And
Right.
so, the bad guys can now use that to generate the context of their email. And as it goes even further, we're starting to see some of the deep fake stuff where they can even generate video. So they can take,
Yeah.
a video of your CEO, for example, and send it to you via email where the CEO is saying, "Hey, I need these gift cards, this special thing. I'm not in cellular range. I can't call you right now, but I need you to go give me these gift cards, send me the codes, whatever else." And it is a video that you cannot distinguish. I mean, it looks like your CEO, it sounds like your CEO, it talks like your CEO, the lips move appropriately to match the video. And so, that's kind of where this arms race is going, is they're going to figure that stuff out and they're going to get better, where it's going to become harder and harder for a human being to detect the reals from the fakes.
You know, that really brings up something that I've been thinking about because I've heard of these types of, attack vectors coming through just faking that they're the CEO or faking that they're the chief financial officer. And actually, I met with a startup here in Austin not too long ago who's developing a product specifically for venture capital firms because there's been many venture capital firms, I guess, who have been tricked into wiring money to the wrong account and like outgo millions of dollars to the wrong account, and it's just gone. It's as soon as it hits the account, it's out. And it was meant to go to a startup, right? So that's where they're starting, is to try to bring their security system there. But I've thought of like, you remember that movie Hunt for Red October,
Of course,
right? Where
Sean
they
Connery.
Sean Connery and Denzel Washington, and they have to turn their key at the same
Yes.
time. You turn your key, and you both have to do it. And I think to myself, like, multi-factor authentication may also require multi-human authentication pretty soon, right? And for both of us to agree, this is not fake, this is so and so, but also some of it can be involving folks like yourself and AdviserCyber at the early stages of things. So, for instance, it's not just the technology we install to try to identify fakes and identify bad actors that are attempting to get in or have gotten in, and what to do if they have. But it's also talking about like, hey, CEO, if you're traveling and you need money to move, understand that if we can't verify that it's you, and I can't live talk to you and know that I'm calling your cell phone or whatever, and I can't verify it with another person, we're not moving the money. And I think there's probably very few situations in which that is like a life or death business situation where like we're going out of business if we don't move the money today, right? I think it might be a lot of frustration, it might be pain. A client might be mad if we erred on the side of caution, but I can't imagine an RIA situation in which, like, if we don't wire money immediately right now versus next week when the CEO is back in the office or in the United States, I just can't imagine a scenario where that. You get what I'm saying? Like, it feels like there's like a human element of like a process and a system element that's way more basic than technology. It's more like, hey, this is this type of stuff. You guys need to have these conversations before
Yeah,
things
you're
move.
you're spot on in terms of talking about it being basic. It's interesting when I do presentations on cybersecurity, a lot of times the first part of the presentation is talking about all the, things that bad guys do and all the ways that they can get you and all, and so people are like freaked out by the end of it. And so they kind of go, "Okay, great. Well, what do I do? Like, you've just scared the living daylights out of me. So what do I
Right.
do about it?" And the last slide of my presentation is literally a photograph of an old-fashioned payphone hanging on the wall. And it's like, you know what the cure for all this is? Pick up the telephone,
Hmm.
call the CEO and go, "Hey, did you just send me an email asking me to go buy $1,000 worth of gift cards?" And that literally will thwart any attack that's out there, is just pick up the telephone.
Yeah.
The one other thing that I think, would be a good idea to put out there just as a public service announcement is, because we do see a lot of that wire fraud that you're talking about, where, the bad guys will say, hey, like they'll impersonate a vendor of one of our customers, and they'll say, hey, we've updated our account. We need you to send, the payments to this new account instead. And, of course, that's a bad guy account, and that's how they get the money.
Mm.
One of the things that I'll put out there is the FBI actually has an incredibly impressive track record of recovering funds like that if you can get them involved very quickly.
Mm.
So within the first 24 to 36 hours, they've got an unbelievable team out of Quantico that can trace down wire transfers and items of that nature, and actually have a really good success rate at recovering those funds. So something for people to keep in mind. Again, that has nothing to do with me or with AdviserCyber, but just
Yeah.
something to keep in mind is that, and again, they're not going to help you if you PayPal'd somebody $20 that you didn't mean to. But if it's tens of thousands of dollars that you've just wired out of your company, and then you realize, when you talk to the CEO 30 minutes later, like, yeah, no, I didn't tell you to do that. Get law enforcement involved, and get them involved quickly, because
Yeah.
time is of the essence in recovering that stuff.
Really, really smart advice. It's true. Like, move quick. Like, so people get embarrassed, and so
Right.
and their shock. It's like, look, be embarrassed later.
Right. Let's get
Fix
the money
now.
back first, then you can
Fix
be
now. Then
embarrassed.
go be embarrassed. Have a few drinks. After you've reported the crime. One crime that seems to happen, and I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse or not, or if you've come across this and helped companies navigate fixing it, but it seems frequently in the news we hear about ransomware attacks. And for those who don't know what a ransomware attack is, somebody, a bad actor, will somehow get into your computer system and lock you out. You will be able to do nothing. You won't be able to sign into, your emails or anything. You won't be able to sign in and go to your financial accounts, most importantly, to help your clients. That is very problematic, right? I don't know of a case off the top of my head where that's actually happened at an RIA yet, but I imagine it's coming. Because they're attacking hospitals, they're attacking other infrastructure areas, and sometimes you hear about that ransomware stuff has happened and nobody's told anybody because they just pay it, get it over with, and work on fixing it. What should someone do, to protect themselves against ransomware? Are there things that can be done to avoid it happening? And then I guess B is, if it does happen, what can they do? Like, how could a firm like yours maybe help them get out of it or unlock?
Yeah. So a couple things I'd say. So first of all, let's look at kind of the evolution of ransomware attacks, and what you described is really what I would call a traditional ransomware attack, which is exactly what you described. Bad guy gets in, they lock all your files, they say, you want your stuff back, pay us a bunch of money, and then
Yeah.
we'll all go our separate ways. The problem with that is that the whatever computing public, whatever you want to call it, has kind of adapted to that strategy, and they said, gee, as long as I have a good backup and it's secured, then when the bad guys lock up my stuff, then I can just and they say, pay us a bunch of money, I can just say, go pound sand, and I can restore my backups, and I'm back in business. And so for a while, that kind of caused a dip in the success of the bad guys, because people were just telling them to go pound sand, and I'm gonna just restore my backups. Well, needless to say, the threat actors adapted to that. And so, their initial adaptation was, well, the first thing that we're going to encrypt is your backup files so that you don't have those backups. But then the current adaptation of that is, they are not going to, like, so if they get in today, they're not going to immediately lock your files and demand a ransom. Instead, what they're going to do is they're just going to hang out for a little while. They're going to hang out for a week or two, and they're going to exfiltrate your data. And so they're going to look at, what's the good stuff that you have on your system, Mike Langford? Do you have some financial stuff that might be interesting? Do you have some customer records that might be interesting? Do you have some trade secrets? All that. They're going to look for that, and they're going to take it, and they're going to exfiltrate it, and they're going to store that on their servers. Then at the end of that little waiting period, which is generally, a week, 2 weeks, whatever, then they're going to lock your files, then they're going to ransom. But now the note that you're going to get is going to not only say, we've locked all your files, pay us a bunch of money if you want it unlocked. But it's also going to say, by the way, we also have your data. And if you don't pay us, we're going to release it all to the world. And
Mm.
we're going to sell that on the dark web, or we're just going to release it publicly on the dark web. And so now that creates a whole different motivation. And we've actually had some customers we've worked with in the past that have decided to pay the ransom, not to get the data back because they had their backups, but to avoid the reputational harm of having all of their data dumped out on the web, because this particular customer dealt with a lot of institutional money
Yeah.
and, big dollar amounts, and they didn't want the reputational hit that they had been hacked. And so that's kind of the evolution of ransom attacks. And so this really goes back to what I talked about earlier and the quote from John Chambers, and this methodology that we utilize in protecting our customers, which is assume breach.
Yeah.
Which means, again, we're going to try to keep them out, but we're going to just recognize right up front, like it's sooner or later they're getting in. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. And so we're going to focus just as much effort on detection, mitigation, and kicking them back out. So that when the bad guy gets in and he says, okay, now I'm going to hang out and I'm going to see what you got here, and I'm going to exfiltrate that data over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to go, guess what? You're not, because within 13 minutes of you being in the network, I've detected that you're there. I've locked you out. I've ensured that you can't move laterally at all. And then I'm going to kick you back out again. Right. And so that kind of prevents the master plan from
Yeah.
ever happening to begin with. So that to me is the answer to your question, is to really shift the attitude away from solely prevention and, invest equally in detection, mitigation and remediation, and not just prevention.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting as you were talking about what the new breed of ransomware of getting in and getting information that you might not want to have public, taking that information and then ransoming that, like, hey, we will release this whether you like it or not. I'm reminded of something that Nicholas from Hush was saying. He says one of the threats that's been happening to clients, the clients of financial advisors, has been a threat vector through teenagers. And they will get teenagers to, they'll impersonate a hot girl or whatever, or hot boy, and get them to send nudes, or if you will, some naked photos or videos of them. And then they'll take those photos or videos and they will say, we're about to let the entire world see
Yep.
your nudes if you don't
Yep.
pay us XYZ money. And so I get the question that I would have for anyone in the audience is, what is your company's version of nudes? Right? Like, what do
Right.
you have?
It's a
Like,
great
honestly,
question.
it's like, what do you have? What kind of information do you have about your clients, or you have as a team and that could be potentially embarrassing? Stop and think about it. Like, it could be, as an example of, I'll use this, an absurd example. Like, oh, maybe we are a firm that holds ourselves out to be all about green investing, and you've got a portfolio in your in your roster that has a lot of oil and so forth, that you're whatever, something that might just make you look really bad to your clients or whatever. That's an absurd example, a simple example, but clean it up if you can. I guess it'd be one thing, like, take away the attractiveness, like, but it's really fascinating that you're thinking about, like, getting all these things in place ahead of time is really seems to be one of the operative messages you have here. I know we're kicking for home, but I wonder if you could leave with a few, maybe, like, kind of action steps. I mean, what can somebody do? I mean, certainly hire AdviserCyber, but, like, what are some things that they should be looking to do first, like, kind of the check in the boxes as they move along here to make sure they're secure?
Yeah, so I know I sound like a broken record, and anybody who's ever heard me speak would say I sound like a broken record. But number one is always MFA, which we talked about. Like, turn it on, for heaven's sake. I
Yeah.
can't believe how many companies we still run into. They're like, yeah, it's interesting. I actually had a conversation very recently. I want to be careful to maintain confidentiality with
Yeah.
a current customer, talking about MFA, and they had MFA enabled for all of their users except the CEO. And
Oof.
this is something that, we see pretty frequently, because, the CEO is like, I don't have time for that MFA. I need to, what, blah, 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 whatever. And it's like, I sat across the table from him and I said, who do you think is the most high profile person in this
Yeah.
organization and likely to be the focus of an attack? So MFA, turn it on for
Yeah.
everybody. Yes, even the CEO, I understand that it's a minor inconvenience, but you know what? They'll get used to it. And then I'll share a statistic from one of the reports that I mentioned earlier. This was the big CrowdStrike annual threat
Yeah.
report. And they reference something in there they call breakout time, which is from the moment the bad guy gets in to when they start, accomplishing their goal. So that's exfiltrating data or encrypting your data or whatever else, moving laterally, whatever. So the good news is it went down a little bit. In 2022, it was 84 minutes on average across the CrowdStrike data set. In 2023, it was 62 minutes. So basically what that's telling you is from the moment the bad guy gets in, you've got 62 minutes before they're doing damage, right? And so that really goes back to the analogy I talked about earlier is, the police officer versus the SWAT guy with the ballistic shield. The police officer, I don't know that they're going to make it in 62 minutes. I don't know that they're going to, detect, prevent, mitigate all those things that we talked about within 62
Right.
minutes. So during that 62 minutes, you're at that moment that I was at during that incident where when that SWAT guy finally walked around the corner, I'm like, yes, that's the guy that
Yeah.
I want to see. During that 62 minutes, it's the AdviserCyber, guy that you're going, yep, that's the guy that I want to see during this 62 minutes. And so that's kind of the second theme when you talk about what can people do. Shift your mindset. Remember that quote from John Chambers, 2 types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that don't yet know it, right? And shift your mindset. You can't just focus on prevention. You're going to lose that battle.
Yeah. I wonder, this is just me nerding out. I'm just curious. Does part of that solution, the SWAT team, involve like you effectively push a button and everybody is immediately logged out of the system? Like everybody's kicked out? Because it feels like it's kind of like shutting the doors, right? Like nobody gets out, nobody gets in right now. We're locking it down. You know what I mean? Like, boom.
It's actually, we go even a little further than that. It's beyond just logging them out of the system. We actually have the ability, using the tools that we utilize with our customers, to isolate each individual computer. So it's not only like shutting the doors and nobody gets in or out. It's like, I'm going to put each person in a separate room and I'm going to shut the door of each individual room and nobody comes in or out of any one of those individual rooms.
That's great. I love it. I love it. I know sometimes there's probably some people who are like, hate these types of conversations. I got to listen to cybersecurity all again. But listen, in our industry, there's something called the Willie Sutton rule for a reason. Willie Sutton was a famous bank robber. And when they asked him, why do you rob banks? He said, that's where the money is.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And financial advisors, guess what? You are where the money is. Even if it's not your money, you got an RIA that has a few $1 billion AUM. That's a lot of money to have access to, right?
100%.
There's a lot of wealthy people's IDs to potentially steal and use for whatever purposes and so forth. Get information for other stuff. So, like it or not, this is really important for you. Well, Michael, this has been fantastic. I'm sure people are going to want to learn more and connect with you. AdviserCyber.com.
You got it. And it's advisor with an ER using the SEC spell. I was looking at one of the news groups that I'm a member of, and they were having this big debate over ER versus OR. And I think the final conclusion was most people voted for ER, but it's advisor with an ER, AdviserCyber.com.
We will make sure we have that linked. If you can buy the Advisor OR domain as well, get that in there. Go buy it. But if you don't have it, that's fine. We'll have you linked up in the show notes on this. I assume you're also active on LinkedIn and other places. Where else can people find you, follow along, and learn more?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn is a great place. We're also on Twitter as well. So, and Twitter is where I'm a self-described SEC junkie. So I follow everything that they do and read it. Yeah. Like I was joking with somebody. I had a very long international flight a couple days ago, and I spent a significant amount of that flight reading the 300-page finalized Reg SP from the SEC, because that's just how I roll. So Twitter is where I put out a lot more of the real-time stuff, like, hey, the SEC just announced this, or this is the deadline for this, or this is coming down the pipe, or here's this new attack that's out there. So both Twitter and LinkedIn are good places.
Fantastic. Well, Michael Cocanower, fantastic having you on the show. Thank you, sir.
Thanks very much. Enjoyed it a ton.
Thank you very much for listening to and/or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. Huge props to Michael Cocanower for coming on the show and sharing all of his insights about cybersecurity. Well, maybe not all his insights, but lots of really good stuff. I mean, and he's got a point, right? You want that SWAT team at the ready. It's not enough to kind of put all the locks in the security system on the house. Like, what happens when you have the break-in? What happens when something's going wrong? Fast and strong response at the ready is what we're looking for, okay? All right, that's all I have for you today. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform and be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. See ya. Bye.